The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Hello, welcome into Ain't No Fang. We are so close to the start of the regular season. It is Friday, March 21st. The season starts on Thursday, March 27th, when the Diamondbacks take on the Chicago Cubs. I'm Alex Weiner with Ali Nerini, and joining us, special guest, former longtime host of this show and on the radio for the Diamondbacks pre- and post-game. It's Steve Zinsmeister. Steve, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Alex. I really appreciate it. Hey, Ali, good to see you as well. I don't know how special a guest, but yeah, I appreciate the invitation nonetheless.
Well, it depends how you perform. I suppose is how special.
All right, well then we'll grade it afterward.
Exactly.
You let me know how I did.
Ali, how's everything going?
Going good. How about you?
It's going well. Are you still going back out to ballparks those last couple days?
Yep, got a couple more Cubs games, actually 3 more, and then and then getting ready to start the radio side of everything. So it'll be an interesting and fun season.
Yeah, and the Diamondbacks obviously start with the Chicago Cubs, so you can give us the kind of the scattered.
Yeah.
It is a little strange that they go play regular season games in Japan and come back and play exhibition games, but that's just how it works.
I'm interested to see how they're going to adapt. The Cubs will adapt, especially too with the time change and the travel. Like, it's kind of weird too that they're going to be coming back to do a couple more spring training games and then go into the season. But
if you're the Cubs, this is the road trip to start with,
right?
Because you're already here.
Yeah.
You don't have to go anywhere.
With the Dodgers, you hear they're doing exhibition games in LA with the Angels. So that kind of makes sense for them just to head over to LA and, finish off the spring training season there. And then they start off, in LA. Yeah. So,
yeah, that makes sense. And we'll get into more Cubs, Diamondbacks preview stuff coming up here. But for now, it has been a pretty big week of Diamondbacks news in terms of decisions, non-decisions, some roster spots that we kind of can figure out what's going to happen with those. So that's why we kind of just want to break down kind of the biggest headlines of the week. And we'll start with the most recent opening day starter. The Diamondbacks announced that Zac Gallen will get the ball over Corbin Burns. Can kind of presume that Corbin Burns will get the ball in game 2, but that hasn't quite been announced yet. But for those counting at home, Zac Gallen pitched yesterday and Corbin Burns pitches today. That is what it does kind of have that.
Just do the math
to it.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're there.
But for Zac, it's kind of the explanation from Torey Lovullo was what you'd kind of expect. Guy who's been here through everything, got here in 2019. He's one of 4 players on the team who was also on the team in 2019 with Kevin Ginkel, Ketel Marte, and Merrill Kelly. And this is going to be his 3rd straight opening day start. He started in 23 at the Dodgers, last year at home against the Rockies. I'll start with you, Steve. Any surprises there? Did you think it was going to be Corbin?
I actually would have made the case for Gallen. I have a little bit more of a specific reason in mind than what Torey gave. I think really what it came down to was he trusts him.
Yeah.
And, from my perspective, I sit with Torey before every home game and we do 5 minutes for the radio pregame show. And I can tell you from experience that days when Zac Gallen was on the mound, he's different. He's just lighter. Torey is, because there's just less stress involved. And I think that matters to a manager, the level of trust that you've built up in somebody, the equity that you've built up over time. And I think if this was just a matter of talent, Corbin Burns would have been the guy on opening day. But there's more to it than that. And honestly, I don't think the organization or Torey sees it as, any sort of major statement that they're making by who pitches opening day. They're going to throw the same number of games throughout the year. I actually like it from the perspective of there's a lot of hoopla around opening day, no matter who's pitching. And now game 2, we presume, can be all about Corbin. It can be the debut game. And from a marketing and ticket sales standpoint, which I'm sure they don't care about in the front office, but that game becomes all about Corbin now. And I think that's kind of cool. My ultimate reasoning for Gallen was I think the message you send is stronger by putting him out there. The message you would have sent if Corbin pitched opening day is this is our guy for the future. He's our ace and we're ride or die with him. That's not a bad message.
No.
But I thought it was a stronger message to throw their support behind Gallen, no matter what his future looks like on an individual level, whether he's here long term or not. And, not that he had a bad season last year, but it wasn't quite up to his ace standard. And I think throwing their support behind him, if it can help even just a little bit, I think that's awesome. And it shows the sacrifice Corbin is willing to make for the betterment of the team. It's a really strong team message, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And Ali, I'll ask you, from a fan's perspective, does the opening day start? Like, how much weight does it hold to have somebody, you go to the ballpark or you see on the probables or whatnot, it's like, okay, that's our opening day starter. How much does that matter, do you think?
it has some weight. I feel like people like the pomp and circumstance of opening day. I know I do. Like, you like to go and see the, bunting around the ballpark. You like to, see, get back in there and see the hot dog vendors and see the music going on the video board, playing all this fun stuff. So like, I think obviously the casual fan that's what they're there for. They're just there for the whole extravaganza of it. But the diehard fan, it is important to have their opening day starter where they're just like, okay, like, oh, Gallen's the opening day starter. I could get behind that. And then it's like, oh, but then I agree with Steve, is like with the fact that you have Corbin Burnes the next day, that brings an extra eyes on the team, So, it's just going to bring more fans in, even back-to-back days. So
yeah, I'm not sure they'd have a ton of trouble selling tickets for the opening series against the Chicago Cubs.
No, definitely not.
But you're right. To both of your points, it does kind of highlight that second game that it can be a little bit more about him and about the debut. With Gallen, you're right. I guess talking about his season a little bit, just because it feels right to do that here. Last year was a bit more inconsistent than what we've seen from him in the past. He was really, really great in 2022, especially in the second half, where it felt like he didn't give up a run like in a lot of his starts. He had obviously that scoreless inning streak, and then 2023 high expectations. Not quite as good as 2022, especially in the second half, but still a Cy Young finalist, an All-Star for the first time. And you're right, last year he was kind of searching, it felt like, for a lot of the year to try to find that right feel. But man, if he can kind of, even the version we got last year was really good. He was a 3.65 ERA with 148 innings. If he stays healthy, he pitches more than that. But if he can find kind of closer to what we saw in 2023 or even in 2022, along with Corbin Burnes as being as consistent as he is, that as far as a 1-2 punch in the league, that's right up there with pretty much most, if not every possible 1-2 punch, if you're going to rank them.
It's funny how I think about all of the starters really in the rotation and the guys who may be just on the outside looking in. And I think to myself, man, if you just get a smidge more from them this year than you did last, because of how many guys missed time. I mean, Eduardo Rodriguez is a great example. Like, I watched him pitch the other day and it was, a flawless outing against the Angels, I think it was. And I'm like, man, if he throws like that, 10, 15 times this season, that's a huge boost to a team that already won 89 games. I think the same way about Merrill Kelly, who missed 4 months of the season, or, you think about what Nelson could provide, what Fott could provide if his numbers improve just a little bit, which you have to think they will at some point. It's like, how much better can that team be if 4 or 5 of those guys are showing just a little bit of improvement? Mm-hmm. An 89 win team with a little bit of improvement from everyone all of a sudden is a 90 to 95 win team.
Yeah. And I mean, and we still don't know who the fifth starter is going to be. We'll kind of get to that as the final touch in terms of what this roster is going to look like, as we're getting closer and closer to clarity. But yeah, it will be exciting as the team kind of reintroduces itself to the fan base and to the league, that Zac Gallen, the guy who's been here the longest, basically, with him and Merrill Kelly in terms of the starting pitchers, will kind of lead them to that. And then, Burnes, that'll be a highly anticipated debut. Let's move on a little bit, just because there's a lot on this list, and clarity with closer, or not so much clarity with closer, because they're going to go by the matchups. They're not going to pick somebody by opening day, it doesn't sound like. So all that, like, is it going to be Ginkel, or is it going to be Puck, or is it going to be Martinez? That's going to move on and be pushed into the season. Any surprises with that, Allie, or is that what you kind of expected? Yeah,
I mean, that's what I kind of expected. You were looking over through, Puck and Ginkel and Martinez, and they, you want to, ball players are creatures by habit, so they want to have that set role. But those 3 guys, I think you could put them in any situation, you're going to get a good outcome. So, like, I don't feel like there's a huge need right now to put a straight up closer, on somebody right now. Like, it all depends on the matchup to me, especially with AJ Puck, with being a lefty, you can put him up in certain matchups. So, I just think with the closer, those 3 guys, they'll eventually get their roles planned out, throughout the season as the season goes on.
Right. And that's kind of the intention here, is to have somebody emerge and potentially take that over. You're not a closer until, you do it and you have that experience doing it. We've heard Mike Hazen allude to that, kind of like the starting pitcher. You're not an ace until you go out and you be an ace. So I guess, I'm just curious how long it'll take for somebody to potentially do that. How long will it take? What do they have to see from somebody to trust them to potentially give them that title?
Yeah, and I think sometimes we overthink the closer thing too, where we really want to just give somebody that title. And the reality is,
it's so nice and like in a nice package when you have like, okay, this is this guy, this is that guy.
We like to know what's coming.
There's merit to that. Certainly,
Yeah.
There's some merit to that. But yeah, it's not the be all end. A bullpen can function like this, I think.
The reality is the closer is whoever ends up coming out of the bullpen in the ninth inning, right? And so even though we'd like to know now, what is it, like 5 days, 6 days before the season starts, we'd love to know who's going to be coming out in the ninth. But we're going to find out probably opening day, maybe the day after, assuming that they grab a lead in one of those games. But I do think that to Allie's point, who is going to be the closer on any given day is largely going to be determined by how AJ Puck is used, because he's the lefty. So if they, are about to get, I don't know, we're facing the Cubs. So let's talk about Kyle Tucker. Like, assuming you want to get AJ Puck against Kyle Tucker in the later innings, what inning are you facing Kyle Tucker? Is it the 8th inning? Then Puck's probably throwing the 8th inning, which probably means Martinez is getting the 9th inning. And that's just kind of the logical way to look at it based on how they ended last season with their bullpen roles. I've talked about roles with a lot of the guys. Ryan Thompson is one that we've talked a lot about it. Yeah, it makes their job easier to know who lines up where so that they can prepare for, certain guys in the lineup. A lot of these guys they all know who's pitching that day before the game even starts. Sometimes they even know which hitters they'll face, and they can get a good idea of when. So the more guidance you can give them, I think the more successful they can be. That's why the bullpen was so good in that 2023 postseason run, when we knew Thompson, Ginkel, Sewald. It was going to be that way anytime you had a lead. I think they might get there at some point, but I understand right now it's probably going to be Martinez the majority of the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we saw last year. Is you move Sewald off that. They gave Ryan Thompson a couple cracks at it. They gave Puck a couple cracks at it. But for the majority of August and into early September, Martinez was kind of the guy. I mean, he got 8 saves in that stretch. He pitched pretty well, I would say, in that stretch. There were a couple of hiccups when, he would pitch, he would get an up down, or he would pitch in the extra innings when he had the runner on second base and all that kind of stuff. They gave him some pretty hard assignments, but they never quite gave him the title, but they kind of used him in that sense. Potentially, I mean, who knows? Bullpen usage will be a super interesting topic for this season. Maybe super interesting for baseball nerds and not so much for casual fans. But it will be interesting because last year they put a lot of taxing on their main bullpen because of the fact that their starters didn't give them what they had anticipated due to injuries and some performance issues as well. So now you kind of go into a season hoping you get more out of them. Does that kind of be able to keep your guys fresh? And if there are moments where Justin Martinez has to throw 3 out of 4. Does Ginkel, being kind of that trusted guy, if you need a 9th inning reliever, whom is a right-handed pitcher, then that kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility, not only to have one lefty and one righty, but also to have multiple righties who you feel pretty comfortable doing that with.
It's one of the hardest parts about being a manager, and I talk with Tori about this all the time throughout last season, is it's one of the only decisions you have to make as a manager on a daily basis based on what happened the day before.
Yeah.
With a lot of your hitters, that Cattell is going to be leading off against a lefty, or that Corbin's going to play most days. What you don't know is, oh man, if I just had Martinez go 2 days in a row, is he even available to me today? And that's one weapon off the shelf, so to speak. And so, yeah, it is a difficult thing. I know Joe Mantiply got a ton of looks early last season before they had acquired Puck. And so now you're in a situation where you can lighten that load a little bit because you have multiple lefties in that role. So I think they're more equipped now than maybe ever before as an organization to figure out and play matchups. It's not like a lot of teams have the A bullpen and the B, and it's a clear defined thing. Like if these guys are pitching, we're winning today. If these guys are pitching, we're trying to win tomorrow. The Diamondbacks are at the point now where their bullpen is deep enough that a lot of those guys, even that are on the fringe, like maybe a Shelby Miller makes the team, or Dre Jameson will be back at some point. Like those guys are exciting too. Bryce Jarvis showed a lot of improvement last year. Like that's an exciting one. If they end up throwing a starting pitcher in the bullpen, which I'm sure we'll chat about, like this isn't the kind of bullpen where they're just going to throw a guy out there just because he's a body.
Sure.
And I think that's a really positive thing for this team.
Yeah, it's one of those, I think we've talked about it on the show this preseason too, is that there were games last year like you would be down 3 runs. Theoretically, with the offense that they had, that's
a winnable game.
That's a winnable game.
Yeah.
And I don't want to name specific names, but there was a group of relievers who were up and down who, you put in that situation and all of a sudden the 3-run game is a 5-run game. And all of a sudden now it's like, okay, what was a very, very potential workable deficit is no longer the case, and we're moving on to tomorrow. That's what they're trying to shorten up. Kendall Graveman is somebody else who would definitely help out with that once he gets healthy.
Yeah.
Certainly he's had some back stuff that's held him back in the spring. So they would like to have him, fully go. We'll see exactly when the season that'll be. And of course, yeah, as you mentioned it, what they do with the starting rotation matters here, because what they do with those 2 starters who don't make the rotation adds depth to the bullpen, right, Allie?
Right. So too, it all really depends on your starters too, like how far they go. And so, with the more depth you have in your bullpen, the better off you're going to be. So it's good to have that variety and that those options, and even down to AAA to have those guys, to look at and eventually bring up.
Speaking of that, as we kind of transition from the list that we have here, they did make a few roster decisions this week when it comes to optioning Jordan Lawler, optioning Dre Jameson, reassigning Trey Mancini to minor league camp. Nothing particularly surprising here. This is all pretty straightforward stuff, but figured we'd address it because there was some definite intrigue of, Jordan Lawler's playing really, really well. Can he kind of creep his way onto this roster, even though the thinking of the whole time was that he'd probably start in AAA. Dre Jameson throwing 101 miles an hour, which was remarkable. Would he potentially get himself physically ready for a major league load? And the answers to both those questions were not yet, but hold on, because they will seemingly have roles at some point this season. It's just when and in what capacity. So what are you kind of expecting from both of those guys?
Yeah, well, with Lawler, you're right. It never really hit me as a surprise that he was going to start the year in Reno, just because he has the opportunity to get better there that he just doesn't at the major league level, meaning he's going to play every single night. He's going to play some positions that maybe aren't shortstop. He's going to play third base. He's going to play some second base in Reno in order to kind of work on those skill sets so that he can be the next man up, whether it's Cattell or Gino or Jerry Perdomo. If any of those guys go down, knock on wood that they don't, but this is a long baseball season. They need somebody to be waiting in the wings. He can be that guy at all 3 of those positions. And yeah, I fully expect him to be up at some point during the course of the season, whether that's, because of an injury or it's September call up again, like in 23. But yeah, Jordan Lawler, he's certainly like right there on the cusp. I think if it was as simple as who's the most talented player, let's make him the backup, it would have been Lawler, I think.
Yeah.
But that's just not conducive to building him up and continuing to work on positional flexibility. With Dre Jameson, I was a little bit surprised he didn't make the team because, like you said, it doesn't even look like the guy had Tommy John surgery. He's just such a flamethrower. I thought there was a chance he would make the squad for sure. But I understand the reasoning. They made it pretty clear that they didn't want his first opportunities coming off of TJ to be at the major league level. And he hasn't worked up to the point yet where he's throwing multiple innings, which if he ends up being in that role that's kind of at the front end of the bullpen to clean up for some of the starters who don't make it 6 innings, 5 innings, he's going to have to throw multiple innings. And if he can't do that right now, or he probably would tell you he could. But if he hasn't done it to this point, then you don't want to test that at the major league level and have something go wrong. So I totally understand them throwing him in Reno as well.
Yeah. And part of that equation too is back-to-backs. Like as a major league reliever, there's a certain workload or expectation of a workload that you have to have. And it became kind of increasingly clear as we went through spring where he was pitching every 4 days, and then every 4 days, and then every 4 days, and then every 3 days, and then every 3 days. And then they had some rainouts. And so then it was maybe 2 days. But it's just not to that point yet. And that's kind of, what they want to see from him. It's basically just physically, can you recover from outing to outing? It's a guy who's not going in there and he's throwing 89. He's throwing 101 miles an hour after having significant surgery on his arm, that they want us to be able to see that recovery process. So, yeah, will that take a couple of weeks? One, I don't know if it's a possibility. Theory, I suppose, is that, what if it takes a couple of weeks into the season and they want to put one of the starters who doesn't make the rotation in AAA because they want to keep them stretched out? Is that a time to potentially move him up there? Or is that maybe a little bit too soon as well? So yeah, it does seem like he will have a big role in this team, or at least a notable role in this team. But it just might take a little bit of time to get there. And with Lawler, same thing. There's a couple boxes that he needs to check as somebody who played 23, 24 games in total, like including the complex league last year.
He basically missed the full season with different injuries. So, I mean, it's kind of a wash year for him.
Yeah. I wanted to mention Trey Mancini because this was kind of one of the cooler spring training stories. I would say that Jameson had one of the cooler spring training stories, just getting back there after he counted. It was like 600 days since he had pitched in a major league game, and he made it back. Trey Mancini was also another pretty cool one, just because this is a guy who obviously overcame a lot throughout his career, really good start to his career in Baltimore, ended up with a colon cancer diagnosis, missed all of the 2020 shortened season, worked his way back and hit 21 home runs back in 2021. And then from there, his career has kind of gone a little bit on the decline in terms of just his production. Did not play at all last year after was in Miami with the Marlins for spring training. And then, he kind of was like thinking about what is life after baseball last year, and he wanted to give himself one more go. And he was really good this spring. It's spring, it is what it is, but for like a kind of quality of at bat, quality of contact, just quality of person that you have in the clubhouse, being able to kind of learn from these guys and teach some other guys in there. I thought that was one of the more feel-good stories from spring. And, if he doesn't opt out, which he said he wasn't going to, and he's a depth piece in Reno, you never know what could happen and who could potentially go down or what you would need. And if he's raking there, he at least gives himself a shot to potentially contribute to this team at some point in a depth role, which, is to be, I don't know, not even determined, but just to be seen at this point.
Yeah, you got to figure, too, the organization probably brought him in because they've got two first basemen who are both left-handed, hitters, I should say. And so, you've got Naylor, you've got Pavin Smith, who can play the position as well. Mancini just gives you something a little bit different.
Sure.
And not that they're looking to platoon anybody at first base, certainly, but, if they get down the road and one of those guys isn't available for some reason, Mancini could be an option in AAA. And how many guys did we see last year who, they chose to go to Reno, or they end up in Reno and then you get them mid-season? So yeah, if he's willing to, at his age and with his track record, if he's willing to go to Reno for a little bit, he very well might be back at some point, and contributing to this team in a big way. Saw him play a little bit of outfield in spring training as well, just to kind of, it's not something
he's done that earlier in his career a little bit.
Yeah, he's not foreign to it.
First baseman.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so I think they bring him in as a first baseman, but it doesn't hurt to see a little bit of positional flexibility as well. And he's an incredible story. I talked with Mike Hazen about this a couple of weeks ago, and Trey Mancini could never play another major league game and still be an awesome story in baseball. And he's just an excellent presence in the clubhouse. And I think even just having him around the younger guys for the last month probably gives this team at least some sort of untangible boost, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And it was kind of cool that the other day he was able to hit kind of a walk-off home run. It wasn't his last game in Major League camp, but kind of one of the last days that he had in Major League camp, he hits a walk-off home run, which is a pretty cool moment. Doesn't matter if it's spring training or if it's high school or whatever. Like, that's a moment that's going to stick with you.
He could still do it. There's something left in the bat. Yeah. It's just a matter of how much. And I don't know that we know the answer to that yet.
All right, let's go to... Okay, so that's kind of a lot of the news that we learned this week. But there are some final roster decisions that we don't know. They have 4 games left before they go to Chase Field. They have 6 games left before the season starts, right? So they play tonight against the Milwaukee Brewers. They play on Saturday against the Giants. That will be in Scottsdale at Scottsdale Stadium. And then they have a split squad on Sunday. 2 games, exhibitions with Cleveland on Monday and Tuesday, and then it's go time. So obviously there's the big one who's going to be the 5th starter, but there's a couple of smaller decisions that they have to make, one of which is the utility infield spot and then the backup catcher spot. So I guess we'll start with the backup utility infield spot. Because we've had some kind of recent news with that. Because Garrett Hampson reportedly opted out of his minor league contract. That doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to be on the team, but it just kind of means he doesn't want to go play in AAA with the Reno Aces, even though he is a Reno native himself. So Ildemaro Vargas is now kind of the on-roster guy who's kind of positioned for that. Blaze Alexander has dealt with an oblique injury, which has kind of taken him out of the running, at least for opening day. So there's that, and then you have fifth starter. What do you do with Jordan Montgomery? All that stuff that's going to be sorted out. Allie, what are you kind of most looking forward to learning from this weekend as we get into the final days before the regular season begins?
Yeah, I mean that the utility position is interesting. We were talking about Lawler, where he can even potentially, if like you still need that extra utility player to eventually, if ever Vargas goes out too, you can bring him up. He can serve as a utility guy. So the Hampson deal, that's interesting of the timing on that. So yeah, I'm curious to see how that's going to pan out. And then Montgomery's another topic that I'm kind of interested in to see what are they going to do with him. That's my question, is what do they have for him?
What are kind of the options for what you can do? Because it seems like the options are put him in the rotation, put him in the bullpen, try to trade him, which they are and they have been, or let him go, even though there's a $22 million or $22.5 million salary there. So yes, that's something that we'll continue to kind of dig into. Not a whole lot new on that front in terms of just like, what his spot in the rotation or what the roster is, but he did pitch this week and he pitched pretty well. It was a lot more Jordan Montgomery-y in the way that you would envision him pitching as opposed to what we saw earlier this spring. And then John Gambadoro reported that teams have called about him. So there's maybe a little bit of clarity coming. But yeah, I mean, it can kind of go either way still. There's still a lot of uncertainty there. Yeah.
So we'll see again how that pans out. So, is he going to, it's just really, to me, is he going to stick with the team or not? That's my biggest wonder for this so far.
Sure. Infielder, what are your thoughts on kind of where they're at right now? Because with Hampson, it is super interesting because he did look like kind of, not the favorite necessarily, but maybe the favorite just because of his speed and not only the versatility to play the infield, but also the outfield.
Yeah, everyone I talked to in camp over the last few weeks was under the impression that Hampson had a really good chance to make the team on the opening day roster. And maybe that is the case, that he could have. I think with the news today that he opted out, I think that was originally interpreted by most people as, he was told he's not going to make the team and, he's going to go look for opportunities elsewhere, which to your point earlier, it doesn't mean he's gone forever. Look at what happened with Kevin Newman last year, where
opted out, came back.
He opted out, looked around the league, didn't find something that he liked better, and ultimately went to Reno. And fortunately for him, he was only there a couple, I think it was like a week or whatever. It felt like a week. Yeah. And he ends up back and being a major contributor to that Diamondbacks team last year, starting at shortstop for a lot of that time that Perdomo was out. So it doesn't mean Hampson's gone forever. But I do look around the rest of the league. We got some news today about the Colorado Rockies and their second baseman might be out for a significant period of time. So now Hampson's familiarity with the Rockies might mean that they called and said, hey, we have an even bigger opportunity available. Sure. Instead of being the backup in Arizona, you could come potentially be a starter for a couple months with us. And then who knows what doors that opens for him down the road. So I think there was a world in which Hampson made the team. And I'll go a step further. I think there was a world in which he and Vargas could have made the team. It would have involved a couple of other pieces moving around, chiefly among them. I wonder if they could have used the justification they gave for sending Lawler down to AAA. I wonder if they could have done the same for a guy like Alek Thomas. Just in that, I think we all know that Thomas is a top 5 outfielder in their system, and he probably should be at the major league level. He's more than capable in the outfield. But in talking with him just the other day on our podcast, actually for the team, he made a really good point about like every opportunity I can get on the field matters to me because I missed so much time in 24 due to injuries, and I got to get my legs under me, like literally. Yeah. And so I wondered if maybe they would try to start the year for Alek in Reno just to get him more opportunities, because I think Jake McCarthy, that is, did earn the starting role in center field this year. And so I think there might have been a world where Hampson could have been an infielder / outfielder, where he is kind of the 5th guy in the outfield. And maybe the need for an Alek Thomas wouldn't have been immediate. But let's be honest, these are really great issues to have where we're talking about, we have too many good outfielders. Yeah. We have too many good starting pitchers. Yeah. We have too many options to come out of the bullpen in the 9th inning. It's amazing to me that we're at this point with the Diamondbacks where just a couple of years ago, the questions were like, we need starters at certain positions and we don't have
the third baseman of this baseball.
Right. Or like even just a couple of years ago before the catcher situation was resolved, who's going to be the backstop full time? I think that was starting to be a question. So it's really nice to have a lot of these issues where it's not really an issue at all because Vargas and Hampson both played really well in spring, and I could have seen either one of them in that role.
This is why you're a special guest.
I don't
This is
know.
why you can earn the title for special guest.
So I'm grading out okay?
I think you're grading out
Okay.
okay.
80 grade guest? Where are we at?
Oh, 80 grade.
That's really high for those of you who are scouts at home.
You gotta, that's high. But that's very good.
Okay.
I love that point. I think that's a great point. Alex Thomas played 39 Major League games last year, and the thing that he said at the beginning of camp when we talked to him was that last year when he came back up after the hamstring injuries, his main focus was health. He was thinking about it.
Yep.
Kind of the offensive adjustments that he made preseason after having such a big postseason, that wasn't really front of mind, even defensively. That it was nursing the hamstring, making sure I'm okay is the most important thing, to be on the field and available for my team. And eventually he got sent back down because it wasn't effective. And then he got hurt again. And so he lost even more reps. So I think that's an interesting point. It will take some 40-man roster maneuvering a little bit because Ildemar Vargas is not on the 40-man. He was a non-roster invitee. Garrett Hampson now opting out of a minor league contract. What do you do with him? And Shelby Miller's not on the 40-man either. And so you're going to have a spot open up because Blake Walston, unfortunately, has to have Tommy John surgery and he's going to be out for the year. But then you kind of have to make some other decisions. It opens up some other doors for you. But it is kind of an interesting idea to get him everyday reps when there isn't an obvious role for him in the major leagues to get everyday reps because of how good Jake McCarthy was, because they brought back Randall Grichuk, because Lourdes Gurriel is still on the team, and because they have Corbin Carroll just to round out the outfield. It's a stacked group. It's a very stacked group of outfielders. And so if you can have somebody like a Garrett Hampson who can play out there and can play center field too, that's super interesting. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that's likely to happen. I don't think it is. I think that you're probably going to go into the season with Alex Thomas as one of your outfielders, and Torey Lovullo is pretty good about playing time, getting guys in there, mixing and matching, playing matchups later in games. So it's not like he's not going to play. But I do think that's an interesting point and something to maybe, if it wasn't on your radar, to look out for as we go into the season.
And if we didn't get the Hampson news that we got today, then this would certainly be more of a point. But there's so many guys like that, like Alec, Brandon Pfaadt, Ryan Nelson, where like there is a scenario where they could start the year in Reno. And I would hate that because I just know these are major league caliber players.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean they can't improve. That doesn't mean they can't have a better year in 25 than they had in 24. It's just there's not enough room for everybody at all these different position groups. And so guys like Alec, guys like Brandon, like it would pain me to see them have to go down to Reno for any given amount of time. But we just know what they're capable of. We know that they're major league caliber players. And so we want them all to make the team. But that's just not the world we live in.
Yeah, it's a good world to live in. But it's also
it
very
is a good world.
To live in.
It's a good world.
Like if we had the exact amount of players that we need for a baseball team, then that makes our lives easier until somebody gets hurt.
They have a lot of flexibility in this roster that more than ever before. And that's something that Torey Lovullo and the coaching staff values so much, which is what made Hampson, frankly, a really, really good fit for this team. And I'll make this point too on Hampson, kind of the final point on that. If it is the reason that he opted out, if it is because the Rockies came calling and said, hey, listen, because of injury, we have a better opportunity for you. Hampson's familiarity with the Rockies is akin to what Vargas's is with the Diamondbacks. Yeah. They know Vargas. They know him super well. They know his strengths and weaknesses. They know that they can trust him to make the plays at shortstop. So I wouldn't blame Hampson at all if that is the opportunity that he ends up going with.
Yeah, Bob Nightingale of USA Today, when he reported that Thairo Estrada, the Rockies second baseman, has suffered a broken wrist, he mentioned Nicky Lopez and he mentioned Garrett Hampson as potential fits. Whether or not he heard of something in terms of, did they reach out to him? Is that the reason why he's opting out? I don't know. I can't speculate on that. But it will be something interesting to kind of watch for in these last few days as we kind of get closer and closer and run into like fewer and fewer of these roster decisions, but still some big stuff to look forward to. Before you leave, I did want to play a bit of a trivia game with both of you because we have the opening day starter.
Uh-oh.
And because of that, first of all, did either of you read my story on Zac Gallen being named the opening day starter?
Yes.
You did?
Well, I read one of them, yes.
Did you see a specific list at the bottom of the story?
I did.
Do you remember the list at the bottom of the story?
Of the starters of each opening day?
Yes.
Yes.
I have not looked at it, so
Brutal.
no offense, I didn't read your story.
So we are going to do this with you alone then.
Okay, fantastic. Great, no pressure. Got it.
How well can you do at naming every single Diamondbacks opening day starter? Because we're only going back to 1998. It's not like we're going back to 1812 or
We're not the Red Sox.
I could maybe get you back into the 2010s.
But let's see.
So I could name names. I couldn't probably give you accurate years.
That's fine. Let's see if we can get them all.
So obviously Gallen has the last handful.
Gallen has the last two.
Robbie Ray.
Nope.
He's just an opening day?
No.
I thought didn't Torrey say at his press conference Robbie threw an opening day?
He did.
Yeah, but he was wrong.
It wasn't Robbie Ray. No.
Oh, okay. So Greinke threw a bunch.
Greinke has 3 of them, but not all 3 in a row.
My good friend Josh Colmenter threw one.
Josh Colmenter has 2015.
There's a more recent one, is there?
You're missing a couple of recent ones, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
who would be before Gallen?
Before Gallen, Bumgarner.
Yeah, 3 of them in a row.
Yeah. Okay, so those are that. How long does that take me back to?
So Greinke started in 19, so you're back to there. It's 2018.
Did Patrick Corbin throw any?
He did.
Okay.
2018, Patrick Corbin.
Okay. So now I'm looking at what, 17?
Well, Greinke threw in 17 and 16.
Okay.
And Colmenter in 15. So you've
I'm
got
at
everybody
14.
after 2015.
Okay. Yeah. I kind of thought this is where I would get to before I kind of flamed out. I mean, there's obvious ones I could check off from like previous years, like Randy Johnson.
Sure. That takes you from 99 to 2004. So that knocks out a lot of years.
Yeah. Brandon Webb would have thrown a handful.
Brandon Webb, 2006 through 2009. So
Dan Herron.
2010.
Now we're getting a little trickier.
So you have 4 more.
4 more?
You have 1998. You have 2005. You have 2011 through 13. And then you have 2014.
Did Schilling get 05?
No, he did not.
Okay.
He wasn't on the team, I don't think.
Oh, yeah, he'd been gone by then. Now is where I just dip into like random names I remember, like Miguel Bautista.
No, he did not.
Okay.
It's not a bad guess, though.
Man, are these like obvious?
I think one is obvious.
Yeah, one is obvious.
One's kind of obvious.
Because he did it 3 years in a row.
Gosh, which years?
2011 to 2013.
11 to 13. Oh, those were good. The 11 team was pretty good. Gosh, I'm really striking out here. I don't know. That's probably where I wrap up.
Where you draw the line?
It might be where I draw the line. I did okay.
You did pretty good.
I passed, I think, in terms of percentage.
Yeah,
I don't know.
of them, yeah.
So you're missing 2014 Wade Miley.
Wade Miley, okay.
The 3 years in a row was from Ian Kennedy.
Ian Kennedy, that's the obvious one.
That's the obvious one.
Okay.
2005 was Javier Vasquez.
Yeah.
And then 1998, you want one more crack at who started the very first Diamondbacks game in their franchise history as somebody who works for the team and will not be judged?
98. Who works for the team? Oh, so I'm missing the person who...
No, he doesn't work for the team.
As someone...
You get the first ever pitcher to take them out in Diamondbacks.
No, I mean... I just started working for the team last year. Does that help me at all? No, I don't know.
I don't know if there's a certain level of trivia knowledge that comes with it. No, it's Andy Benes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I never would have gotten that.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. But no, that's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about the significance of starting opening day that Allie was talking about earlier. I was talking about that with Josh Colmenter just the other day, who got, one of those. And it maybe wasn't like the obvious choice for an opening day. And I don't remember the context of it all, but there is so much that players value in being told you are the opening day starter. And Zac Gallen is a quirky guy. I don't claim to know him well enough to understand everything going through his head, but I would think that being told this year that you're starting opening day, part of him is like, yeah, okay, cool. Like it's any other game. And I think there's probably a part of him inside that's a little bit giddy still, even though this is the 3rd in a row that he's thrown. And so I don't think that gets old for players to be told like, hey, you're the one we're trusting to go out there on the biggest game of the year. To that point,
until the next one.
Yeah, until potentially you make the playoffs. He made
where he was like, on one hand, yeah, it is the biggest game until the next one, and then they're the number 1 starter for that day. But he also said it's not lost on him, kind of the honor and the responsibility of being given this job when there's other players in the clubhouse with the stature and the pedigree to go out and do it. Because Corbin Burns has done it for the last 3 years on both the Brewers and the Orioles. Even Eduardo Rodriguez has done it twice in his career as well. You have so many like guys with so many like accomplishments there that even for Gallen, who has been the ace of this team for a long time, it's still, he kind of can take a step back, and that's a pretty cool thing to be given. And that's kind of the point that he made yesterday when he spoke to us afterwards too. It's
an incredibly accomplished starting rotation. Just talking about like the 5 veteran guys. Gallen has been in Cy Young conversations. Corbin Burns has actually won a Cy Young and has been in that top 5 in voting, I think 4 years in a row. Jordan Montgomery won a championship with the Rangers, unfortunately for us. Eduardo Rodriguez is a champion as well. He's pitched opening days. Merrill Kelly traveled the world to find his arsenal and came back and was such a rock solid presence in this organization. So it really is, when you take a step back and you look at the starting rotation, it's fascinating to see just how much they've accomplished. And that's without highlighting Ryan Nelson, who was arguably their best pitcher last year, or at least during the summer, and Brandon Pfaadt, who was the most available. He threw 181 innings, I think it was, and that was like 30 more than anybody else on the team. Yeah. So when you consider all those accomplishments put together, man, imagine some of those starts last year where we were just like, digging for starting pitchers, trying to find guys in AAA that were just available. Instead of that, this year, they're going to be able to lean on some guys that have been there, done that. And that's going to go a long way, I think. Yeah. And even the guys who are on the next level below the surface, like Gilbert Diaz has done it now. Yeah. At least briefly. Yeah. But he's done it, and he has that experience to take back from. And same thing with like a Christian Mena, even though it was only one start. And they still have Tommy Henry. So the depth is going to be pretty... what's up? I actually, I think it was day 1 of spring training, I sat down with Mike Hazen, shameless plug for my own podcast with the Diamondbacks, the D-backs Rattle On podcast. I was going to give you the opportunity. I appreciate that, but I worked it in anyway. I wove it in. I sat down with him and I asked him to give me the name of like a guy in camp nobody's talking about that you're keeping a close eye on. And he wouldn't give me a guy, but he gave me a position group. And he said, my attention is on the starting rotation at AAA. Mm-hmm. In a year where he has 7 major league quality starting pitchers and he has to decide which 5 of them go to Chase Field as starters, he's thinking about Yu-Min Lin, Christian Mena, Gilbert Diaz, at the time Blake Walston before the injury. Like, he was thinking about that group when you already have a group of 7 guys ahead of them. And it just goes to show you like the attention that this organization has put on depth, particularly starting pitcher, after what happened last year. Yeah, you'd hope you don't have to dig that deep into your depth this year, that you can just kind of get your 30 starts from the guys that you want to get 30 starts out of. Good to have, though. But it is certainly good to have. Yu-Min Lin, another good pull. Yeah. In terms of what we're looking for in terms of the future rotation. And who knows what the rotation looks like going beyond this year, too. So it's important that those guys continue to develop. All right. 80 grade guest. We'll have you on again. We'll bump it down to a 70 because I forgot Ian Kennedy. Is that fair? Is that fair? That's 70 grade? 70 grade. Room to improve, I suppose. 70 grade guest. 30 grade speed? What do you Ouch, dude. 20 grade your speed? I have pretty bad knees, so it's probably fair. Fair enough. Yeah. All right. Steve Zinsmeister, thanks so much for popping in for a few minutes. Thanks for having me. Nerini, thank you as always for coming in. And I'm Alex Weiner. Thank you for listening in on the Ain't No Fang podcast with Arizona Sports. Diamondback season coming up next week. We'll have some more preview material for you guys, so keep it locked in on Arizona Sports.